Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and this is a very special edition. These are, I think, some of the most popular episodes that we do. Our best of albums by the year, and we're doing 1984, which was a fantastic year. So good, in fact, I'm not even really taking part in this one. I did a complete episode, I think, on New Year's Day this year. I did my own personal top 30 because there were so many albums that I wanted to talk about, and I will have a link to that. But I couldn't leave out the rest of, I couldn't just have it be my picks. So I've assembled. This is a first time configuration for Tim's Final Confessions. We've all had these guys on before, but never all at the same time. So we've got Will, we've got Matt, we've got Chez, and we've got myself. And in spirit, because he could not be here tonight, our good friend Bug Campbell sent me his list. So what I'll be telling you are Bug's picks of our top 10 albums from one of the best years in music. I think definitely one of the best years of the 80s, 1984, 40 years ago. Some fantastic albums came out that year. And I have a feeling there'll be quite a few in common, but of course, there's going to be some differences. So what we're going to do is, before we get into the top 10, we're going to talk about some honorable mentions. And so I'm going to go around as I see it clockwise. I'm going to start with Will for his honorable mentions for 1984.
So basically, when I made my list, I just did a 1 through 15, and my 15 through 11 are going to be my honorables. And I'll just go over them quickly. So at 15, I have Crocus with the Blitz. I don't listen to that very often, but when I do, I really like it. Defenders of the Faith, Judas Priest would be my 14. Kiss Animalize would be my 13. This might be the first year that Kiss doesn't make the definitive top 10. Number 12 is Pat Benatar with Tropico. Really got into that when I read her book last year. And number 11 is Rush with Grace Under Pressure.
Cool. Yeah. By the way, Jamie Laszlo would like to say Tropico is his number one for 1984. He did tell me that. I mean, he's a big, huge.
It's very good.
Fan, so.
I really have
that book too.
I really haven't had that much time with it, so that's part of it. But for now, if you want to borrow the book, I do own it.
Awesome. Okay, Matt, your honorables for 1984.
Sure. Technically, this one's just an EP, but I want to show off this little record store day purchase. This is Joe Satriani's EP, self-titled, from 1984. Next up is the debut album from New Jersey's own Bon Jovi. I've really actually been getting into this album quite a bit from 1984. I've been getting into it this year quite a bit. So the next one I wanted to show off, just missed my list, is Queensryche with the Warning. And the last one I'm going to show you is, I think this features the first song by this band that I heard that wasn't from the 1987 album. This is Whitesnake's Slide It In. Those are my honorable mentions.
Awesome. Good catch on that Satriani EP. Yeah, I don't have that. Okay, Chez, your honorable mentions for 84.
Yeah, wow. When I was doing the list and honorables, I had about 30 honorable mentions, and it was just such a great year. So I cut it down to 4 and said, these are the 4 I'm going to show, but there's albums that I love. I'm not even showing. What a year. So my first honorable, I'm going to go with Helix, Walking a Razor's Edge. Okay, love this one. Such a great hard rock album, and what a classic by these guys. Another fellow Canadian band. I can't believe this one's not in my top 10, but I had to show it. Honeymoon Suite, the debut. Just what a killer year for this. I can't believe it's not in my top 10, but I love this album. Such an awesome debut. Another one, just missed my top 10, but of course I love it. Metallica, Ride the Lightning. Okay. What a great album. Like, what a great back-to-back. For Whom the Bell Tolls, Fade to Black. Love the whole thing though. Awesome. Now this one here, I had to show, it is my favorite band, but it's an EP, and it's made up from songs that weren't from 1984, but it was released in 84. Being my favorite band, I had to show it. AC/DC 74 Jailbreak. Just all the songs that were on the Australian releases of the first 2 albums, and they piled them up on this EP, released it in 1984. Didn't put it in the top 10 because it's an EP, but had to show it. So those are my honorable mentions.
Awesome. And I believe those Helix and Honeymoon Suite there, those look to be the rock candy versions of those CDs.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
always very well done.
And both of those loaded with bonus tracks. So yeah, they did good on those two. Yeah.
Awesome. So I've got Bug's list here in front of me. When I have the albums we're going to be talking about, I'll show them. And maybe if somebody else has them handy, they can hold them up. First one I do not have was a big album for this band, Scorpions, and Love at First Sting. Of course, this had Rock You Like a Hurricane. It had Still Loving You, Big City Nights. This was a big album for them. Probably their first really. I think Blackout was pretty successful, but I think this was a really big mainstream album. And this is really when hard rock and heavy metal were entering the mainstream in a big way. Next up is one that Matt's already mentioned. I think I called this album my number 2 for 1984. I love this album, the debut from Bon Jovi. It's so good.
Yeah.
And his next runner-up is hang on. Y&T and Rock We Trust from 1984. Next up is, I keep doing this. Hold on. Sammy Hagar, VOA's big breakthrough, of course, Can't Drive 55. And his final runner-up, great album, Doc and Tooth and Nail. So that's Andy's or Bugs, as we call them, runners-up. So we'll get into the main stuff here. So numbers 10, 9, and 8 this time around, and we'll start off with Will.
So my number 10, an album that kind of avoided for a while, not because I didn't listen to the band, but it's just not the album that I really thought of. But my number 10 is The Foreigner with Agent Provocateur, if I'm saying that correctly. Released December 14th, Foreigner's 5th album. I Want to Know What Love Is was obviously the big hit on this, went to number 1. And that was Yesterday, was the second single, which I think as far as like recent set lists have gone and just songs you talk about when you talk about Foreigner, I think this is underrated for something that did well for them. And Stranger in My Own House has become one of my favorite Foreigner songs. That's just
a great song.
So excellent. Like Lou Graham's vocal intro is like really good, and it's just different from what you think of when you think Foreigner. They definitely have stuff outside of the ballads, even though they're an excellent ballad band.
Especially in this period, right? Well, like this is a very keyboardy pop here from Stranger in the House.
Sure.
Stranger in My Own House is a rocker.
That's a great song. Tooth and Nail, not the album, the song. Another great song, and it's pretty heavy as far as Foreigner goes. Reaction to Action's good. She's Too Tough. Growing Up the Hard Way, and Down on Love is another good ballad wasn't a big hit, but that's a great song as well. So that's my number 10. Number 9, an album that was briefly mentioned, and something I really wish was higher for same reasons, is Honeymoon Suite's self-titled, 3 times platinum in Canada. You had New Girl Now, Burning in Love, which is fantastic. Wave Babies, Stay in the Light, all hit singles for them, at least here. It's Funny Business is a rocker. It's just the album cover is iconic. And I go see them 2 days from now, actually, as of
recording. I was just going to say, you're 2 days away from seeing, was it them, Flock of Seagulls, Men Without Hats, and the Spoons, right?
Yes. And I caught them twice last year when they came through. So I really wish that was higher. But Honeymoon Suite self-titled is my number 9. And my number 8 is another album that's been mentioned, Y&T and Rock We Trust. If you want my full detailed opinion on that, I think Tim has somewhere you could find that. So I won't touch on it too much, but just a really great album. Rock and Roll is Gonna Save the World is a fantastic opener. Obviously, Lipstick and Leather and Your Love Is Driving Me Crazy is something that I wish was released as a single for them. Don't Stop Running is fantastic. And Masters and Slaves is really good. And ending on This Time, that's a great ballad for them. So that is my number 8.
All right. So Matt, your 10, 9, and 8.
Thanks, guys. When I was putting my list together, I just happened to notice that in all, I've got 3 debut albums here that are making my list. One fun soundtrack, and a couple of these albums are big albums that came out after a band had just released a successful EP. So I'm going to start right there with my number 10. This band had a successful self-titled EP. I've just recently started getting into Rat. So this is their first full-length studio album, Out of the Cellar, came out in 3 times. Actually, it reached 3 times platinum. It's not a very long record. It's just under 37 minutes. So I'm fairly new to Rat. I'll let the Rat super fans take over for this. I'm sure this will come up again. But yeah, that's my number 10. My number 9 is another massive album. This is the album with Van Halen and David Lee Roth in the original configuration anyway. This is their January 9th release, 1984, with the Roman numeral. This one went 10 times platinum and peaked at number 2. And the third one that I want to show, my number 8, is a soundtrack. Tim, you're going to have to help me on this. I'm pretty sure all of these songs were written for this movie. The Footloose sound.
Yeah, unless you get the deluxe edition,
Yeah.
which has songs that were in the movie, but were already released. But yeah, the original, those were all written for this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, this one came out early and on January 27th. And this is sort of a project by Kenny Loggins and all these other writers. So you're going to know a lot of these songs. Of course, the title track, Almost Paradise, which is a duet with Loverboy's Mike Reno and Ann Wilson from Heart. That song's actually been completely ruined for me by one of these reality shows that I watch with my wife. The intro plays Almost Paradise, and they do like a really terrible video montage. But something I actually just found out about this today. So I knew that the theme of this movie is that this town has banned dancing. I didn't know it was actually based on a real thing. Elmore City, Oklahoma. They lifted in 1980. They lifted an 80-year ban, no dancing in Elmore City, Oklahoma, and that's what kind of inspired the story behind Footloose. My number 8.
Awesome. Yeah, what a great soundtrack with such great variety on there. And I think one of the unsung songs on there was a single, but everybody knows Kenny Loggins' Footloose, but I love I'm Free, Heaven Helps a Man. I think that's one of those classic 80s soundtrack songs that comes on and just get all pumped up. And
great song.
Yeah. All right, cool. And over to Chez for 10, 9, and 8.
Okay, so my number 10 is going to be Steve Perry's solo album, Street Talk. I love this album. So smooth and some great songs, of course. Oh Sherry, Go Away, Foolish Heart, Strung Out, Captured by the Moment. That's probably my favorite song on the album. And again, we all know the story that this, kind of changed things in Journey. It's been well documented. And then Race on Radio followed, which I guess Steve had, quite a bit to do with. A great album also. Interesting enough, today Neil Sean tweeted a picture of him and Steve Perry at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony. So everybody speculated what that means. Who knows? Neil's just posting stuff, but fantastic album. So I had to put this one in my top 10. Love this one. And again, an album's already been mentioned. So I'm going to go with my number 9, the self-titled from Bon Jovi. Classic, of course, Runaway, that great keyboard riff there. But, songs like Shot Through the Heart, Love Lies, like Back to Back, awesome. Burning for Love's another great one, Come Back. Like the whole thing's a great one, just a solid debut. Still enjoys this to this day. Love this one. And for my next one, for my first 3, I'm going to go Iron Maiden, Power Slave. Fantastic album. Aces High, 2 Minutes to Midnight. Probably what was my first big epic song that I got into, the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Quite a long song. And then, of course, that kind of led to all the other long songs like by Yes that I, liked, many years later. But just a great album and one of their best. So those are my first three for 84.
If you want to find a really rare version of Power Slave on CD, the original CD issue has like a gold tint to it. It looks really cool.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Probably see that on Discogs going for big bucks if somebody has one for sale. I also do want to mention with Bon Jovi, the song Shot Through the Heart, co-written with John and a guy named Jack Ponte. And Jack Ponte passed away this year.
Yeah.
You'll see his name inside different albums, but he had a lot to do with the band Baton Rouge in the early 90s. And you'll also see his songwriting, his name all over Alice Cooper's Hey Stupid. So yeah, so he was a co-writer of the song Shot Through the Heart. So Bugs 10, 9, and 8. We're going to start off with an album I don't think has been mentioned yet. It was a follow-up to a very successful album for this band, and I think this it didn't have a hit single like the last album did, but it was, I think, still a platinum album. Judas Priest and Defenders of the Faith. Like Screaming for Vengeance had You Got Another Thing Coming, which actually got some radio play and was their only song to chart in the Billboard Hot 100. But Defenders of the Faith didn't have anything like that. But I remember watching the Pepsi Power Hour and seeing, I think, Free Wheel Burning. And 3 years before Def Leppard, they had a song called Love Bites. So I think Some Heads Are Gonna Roll is on this album. That was written by Bob Halligan Jr., who also wrote Rock You for Helix. So see some of these connections here. His number 9 album, this was a huge album, and I would say that a lot of younger people's first heavy metal album was the Sisters Stay Hungry, also recently issued in the 40th anniversary edition. This is just an original Atlantic CD. And his number 8 is Kiss and Animalize with this lovely cover I've always thought was so evocative. I've actually always thought it was pretty stupid, but anyway, that's Bugs 10, 9, and 8. So now we go over to Will for 7, 6, and 5 from 1984.
So this is for me this is like a collection 7 through 4. Like they're so close for me. They could really be interchangeable, depending on the mood. But for right now, as of today, my number 7 is Bryan Adams with Reckless. I mean, this album is sold 12 million copies worldwide and had 6 hit singles off of it, like Run to You, Somebody, Heaven, Summer 69, which I think most people know all of those songs. One Night Love Affair, It's Only Love. I always thought the sequencing, if I could nitpick one thing, is that the sequencing is a bit strange, opening with One Night Love Affair and not something like Run to You or something else. And I always thought Kids Wanna Rock would be a really cool closer for the album. But Long Gone and Ain't Gonna Cry are both great songs. It's Only Love is one of my favorite songs ever. So that's my number 7, Bryan Adams. Number 6, something that's been mentioned briefly, Metallica with Ride the Lightning. Normally on here, if we catch years, or Metallica is not so much my favorite, but Ride the Lightning is excellent. A huge step up from Kill 'Em All for me. Fight Fire with Fire opens it off. Still stays pretty thrashy, but you get into some of the stuff that most kids know. The heavy metal introduction with For Whom the Bells Toll and Fade to Black is phenomenal. I love Ride the Lightning. The song Creeping Death is great. So that's my number 6. And number 5, something that's been mentioned by everybody already, is the Bon Jovi self-titled debut. This is my favorite Bon Jovi album by quite a large margin. I listen to this album very, very frequently. Runaway is fantastic with the keyboards and that's such a classic riff. Roulette, I love that, and the riff in that is awesome as well. Shot Through the Heart, Love Lies, it's a good ballad. Love the Whoa Woes in Breakout, like that section is so good. This album is just near perfect all the way through. So Bon Jovi is my number 5, and like John Bon Jovi on this, his vocals are on fire. Like he sounds phenomenal.
It's worth revisiting for people that forgot how, hard rocking a band they were. That first album was so good. Okay, Matt, your number 5. No,
7.
7, 6, and 5.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, all 3 of these I haven't owned on CD for very long. One of them I've never owned on CD. Number 7 is the Cult's first album. So the Cult from the UK, their album Dreamtime, that came out in August. It wasn't a huge seller. I think, Matt, what?
You're cutting out, Matt. I can't really hear any of that.
Oh, really? Nobody can hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. This was actually issued at one point, the live album. Oh, live in the came out in 1984. I'm hearing a lot of it. Sounds like fun. Is that
You're cutting. Sorry, man. You're cutting out a lot.
am I
Am I
coming
the
out?
only one noticing that? Is that on my end? Or?
I hear it too. Yeah.
Okay. We're only getting a word here and there.
Is Deep Purple Ranger? Five is white.
Nice.
Yeah, that's you can't find that on CD. You'd never see that on CD anywhere unless you get like an import version. Yeah. Okay, so Chez, over to you for your 7, 6, and 5.
Okay, one that's already been mentioned, Judas Priest, Defenders of the Faith. Heavy, very accessible. Rock Hard, Ride Free, one of my favorite Priest songs. Just saw Free Wheel Burning, that great video, and so fast and the Halford screams and everything. So Judas Priest, Defenders of the Faith. Another one here, just fantastic album, Rush, Grace Under Pressure. I love every song on this album. I remember when I heard Distant Early Warning for the first time, I thought and still think that's such a great song. But my favorite song on the album, Red Sector A. I just love that song. But the whole thing is just fantastic. Love this one. And another one already been mentioned, just a classic. Van Halen from start to finish, all the singles. I guess you could call them deep cuts, but with only being 9 songs on the album, like Girl Gone Bad, House of Pain, Top Jimmy, Drop Dead Legs, all these songs got radio play at some time and still do. So just a classic. And definitely one of my favorites right there.
Awesome. So Bugs, number 7. I have a feeling this will be mentioned by somebody. I don't have it, but it's the debut album. Again, a lot of debuts this year. The debut album from Wasp on Capitol Records. So this was, Blackie Lawless and Chris Holmes, and I think this album and the second one eventually went gold. But they were like a lot more people knew who Wasp were than their album sales reflected. It's kind of weird. Next up, this album's already been mentioned. I've got a deluxe, like a 25-year edition of it. Whitesnake, Slide It In. Yeah, I think I agree with Matt. I think I saw the video for like either Slow and Easy or Love Ain't No Stranger was the next thing that I heard from Whitesnake after, Still the Night and Here I Go Again. And Love Ain't No Stranger is my favorite Whitesnake song. I don't think it gets much better than that. Great lineup on this album, Posey Powell, John Sykes, John Lord still in the band. The unsung hero, I think, of this album is Mel Galley. Who's now passed away. He had a lot to do with the songwriting on this album, and he, as much as anybody, helped Coverdale into that more commercial, radio-friendly direction. And the number 5 is another one I don't have, but it's one of the all-time classics of metal, all-time classic voices. The second album from Dio, the band, The Last in Line. I mean, this is the classic Dio lineup with Vivian Campbell and Jimmy Bain and Vinny Appice or Appice. I always get mixed up which one of the brothers pronounce their name which way. So that's Bugs 7, 6, and 5. So now we're into some heavy hitters. Numbers 4, 3, and 2 for 1984. Will.
My number 4 is Rat Out of the Cellar debut that's been mentioned. Their most successful album, mostly because of Round and Round, which, I mean, that song's just fantastic. I remember knowing that song even before I really clued in that bands had songs. Like, it's just one of those songs you just know forever. It's always on the radio. Wanted Man starts the album off really great. You get some really fun, bassy intro stuff with You're in Trouble. She Wants Money and I'm Insane are just really fun rockers, fast paced, and I love Back for More. I've always loved that song for some reason. But the album is just, it's not my favorite Rat album. Probably not even, well, it's not in my top 3 Rat albums for being a small discography, but their discography is one of the most perfect that you can get. So this album is fantastic from start to finish. My number 3 is Van Halen with 1984. I mean, there's so many just anthem after anthem on this song. I think I heard Jump the first time watching the new remake of Herbie Fully Loaded when they're doing like the monster truck bit. Like, I think that's the first time I heard this song and like recognized it. Like Panama's one of my favorite Van Halen songs. Hot for Teachers, one of my favorite Van Halen songs. Drop Dead Legs is fantastic. Girl Gone Bad is great. The album is just as good as I can get. And like this year is so good that this is not number 1, which is saying a lot because it could be number 1 a lot of years. And the cover's iconic. And it took me forever to find on vinyl for some reason for how many copies it sold. Number 2, an album that has not been mentioned, a soundtrack, kind of. But I have Prince, Purple Rain.
Nice. Yeah.
This is the album that got me into Prince, and it's just fantastic. The movie is good. You take it for what it is, but the album is just very good. When Doves Cry, I think, went number 1. Let's Go Crazy went number 1. Purple Rain went number 2. And I Would Die for You got up to number 8. I really love Computer Blue, but my favorite Prince song is Baby I'm a Star, and I love the way that I Would Die for You fades into that. But the album is just great. Another one of those albums where ballad ends it off with Purple Rain, but it just is so fitting.
Yeah, awesome.
The cover is iconic, and I mean, Prince is just so talented. I think I talk about that every time I talk about a Prince album. It's just how underrated he is as a musician, let alone an entertainer and a singer. So that's my number 2.
Cool. All right, so Matt, you're 4, 3, and 2.
Cool. My number 4 is the 12th album from this band, who were got deep into their career at this point, but really only 10 or so years. We have Kiss with Animalize. This is the first and only album they did with Mark St. John. Actually, to be honest, this is probably, this is my least favorite Kiss album. But I'm propping it up here simply because it's one of the first albums that I remember from hearing from Kiss. And of course, Heaven's on Fire is just an absolute fantastic song. So that's why I had to make number 4. Number 3 is the second album that I bought from this band. It's actually their 4th Australian band, In Excess.
Nice.
The Swing, that came out in March of 1984. They produced 4 singles on the album. It actually reached number 27 in Canada. And in 2001, I read that it went platinum. So they got a few more sales off of that one. I do have quite a few of their 12-inch singles. So the very first single, this is the original Sin. I also have a 12-inch single for the song Burn For You. So NXX worked with Nick Egan, and what was the other producer's name?
Did Nile Rodgers work on that?
Rodgers, yeah. So Nile Rodgers helped them with producing original Sin, and then Nick Egan worked on all the songs with them. It's got more of a dancey kind of feel to it. This is also an album if you're a real huge fan of In Excess, you know this period not just for the music, but it's when they started working with director Richard Lowenstein, who's known for doing almost all of their classic videos right up until the end. So you can pretty much name an In Excess video, except for a few key ones. They worked on that with Richard Lowenstein. So that's my number 3, In Excess, The Swing. And number 2, everyone's already talked about this one. This one was huge for me. This is, I think, the first album I bought by this band. I've said it's probably my favorite. Metallica's Ride the Lightning, so their second album coming off of a pretty big debut. I mean, something I actually learned about this record today. The title, Ride the Lightning. So that was inspired by Stephen King. So Kirk Hammett was reading Stephen King's The Stand, and one of the characters says the phrase, I'm just going to read it here. It took me a little while to find it because this is what a math book. But on page 192, you can hear me okay.
Yep.
So we're having a little conversation between some of the characters. This is Lloyd, the character of Lloyd. I quit school in the 6th grade, Lloyd said bleakly. After the circuit court turns us down, I'll petition to be heard by the Supreme Court. I expect to be turned down on the same day. His friend stopped and lit a cigarette. Then what, Lloyd? Then, looking mildly, well, you go on to death row at state prison and enjoy all that good food till it's time to ride the lightning. It won't be long. I actually learned that today. I didn't know that's where that song, where the album title came from. So that was
That's cool. So that would explain why there's an electric chair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of what the song's about too, is Capital Punishment. Back to The Swing for a second, Matt.
Yeah.
Have you not told me that was their biggest album in Australia? Or one of their biggest?
Oh yeah. They released 4 singles in Australia, so it is a very Australian album. But at any given time, from this album on, I could say this was, at one time, this was, even while Kick was still huge, this was my favorite In Excess album for a while. You go back and forth, you get sick of listening to one. Yeah, I really dig this album, but of course, originally I would have had it on cassette.
Cool.
That's a great choice, Matt. That's a great album. I really like that one.
Yeah.
Okay, Ches, your 4, 3, and 2.
Okay, 4. I believe it's been mentioned. Dokken, Tooth and Nail. It's classic. I love George Lynch's guitar on this. So many great songs. I want to highlight a great deep cut. Don't Close Your Eyes. Turn on the Action ends the album. Alone Again. One of those great, like, really hard rock ballads before, like, everybody was doing them in the late 80s. So 84 almost set like the blueprint for it, but the whole album's fantastic. Just rocks and very melodic. A great one there. Another one that's been mentioned quite a bit, of course, Rat, Out of the Cellar. And I'm showing the new 40th anniversary edition with the lenticular cover. Still got it on, kind of turns blue there. Great album. Now, what makes this one, why I bought, it's like my 5th copy of this album. I'll keep buying it. It's that unreleased song, Reach for the Sky, that they found. Like, Stephen Pearcy knew they did it and they had it in the vaults, and it's fantastic. What a great song. And they tack it on in the album. But the whole thing's great. Like, The Morning After, like, what a great deep cut. But can't add much more than already been said. But yeah, if you haven't, if you're interested in this 40th anniversary, that bonus track makes it worth it. So great album there. And I'm going to show another deluxe edition here. That had to have this one up high. Bryan Adams, Reckless. So
Oh yeah.
yeah. And I can't add much more than what Will said. Fantastic album. This deluxe edition, it just opens your eyes. Like, what's so cool, and I know, Tim, you've talked about this on episodes. He does versions of songs he wrote that other people covered, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like he realized how many great songs he wrote for other people that were his, and then it's so cool that he does his own versions of them. And, you know, you get the title song, Reckless. And I was always curious why there was never a title song, Reckless. But then when I heard it, we all know that song. That's the Loverboy song, you know, Dangerous there, right?
Yeah.
So, but so good. And I just love what he's doing, that he just redid those 2 Kiss songs from Creatures in his own version. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And how cool is that? Bryan Adams wrote 2 songs, him and Jim Valance, for Creatures of the Night. Like, that's so mind blowing. So everything's great on this album. So had to have this one up there, number 2. And yeah, fantastic.
You know, I think of I mean, yeah, you've almost got another album's worth of songs, and there's 7 songs that are unreleased, and yet most of them are recognizable. Teacher, 38 Special had a big hit with that, and his version is very similar to it. I think my favorite, though, has got to be Let Me Down Easy. That is just a fantastic song. I mean, that could have been a hit.
Yeah.
Or, you know, that could have been a single on Reckless or whatever. Roger Daltrey does a pretty cool version of it, and Brian's actually in the video, which is kind of
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's the original 10-song album is great, but that's a deluxe version. I mean, there's a lot of bang for the buck. There's also a pretty good live disc on disc 2.
Yeah.
From the UK in '85. But yeah, great album. Good. Cool. Okay, so Bugs 4, 3, and 2. All of these albums have been mentioned several times. At number 4, Iron Maiden and Power Slave. You know, this has that iconic artwork, which really begs to be seen on vinyl because there's a lot of hidden stuff on it, but I won't say too much more about that. And next up is number 3, Out of the Cellar. I mean, Round and Round is just one of those bulletproof songs that I will never get tired of. And if it comes on, I'm hearing Rat on the radio, and I'm okay with that. So I just never get tired of it. And I do have to get that 40th edition. I've had this CD for quite a long time. This is probably one of the first 24 CDs I ever bought. Next up is number 2, Van Halen, 1984. Yeah, not much more to add. I think I'll Wait is one of their best ballads, and it's Dave singing, and I think he sings it quite well. It's one of my favorite Eddie solos. Maybe it's because there's not a lot of guitar on that song, so you really zoom in on the solo. But I love Drop Dead Legs and Top Jimmy. I mean, those are good album tracks, but yeah, great album. Short album, very enjoyable. All right, so that leaves us our number 1s, well, collectively for 1984. So Will, what's your number 1?
My number 1, which I knew pretty much right away this was going to be my number 1, but it's Iron Maiden, Power Slave.
Nice.
This is just fantastic. This isn't the first Maiden album I heard. The first I obviously went to Number of the Beast, and I was like, okay, like Iron Maiden, they're good and all. But once I heard Power Slave, I was like, okay, now I understand. Like, I get it now. Obviously, Aces High, 2 Minutes to Midnight are pretty popular, and I do like them. Flash of the Blade I absolutely love that song, but the first version I heard from this is Avenged Sevenfold did a version and put it on there. I can't remember what the compilation's called, Diamonds in the Rough or some compilation they did, and they did a cover of this, and I liked it on that. And then once I figured out where it came from, I was like, okay, like the original is pretty hard to beat the original. Get really cool riffs and Back to the Village, which I love. Power Slave title track, for being 7 minutes long, like it's a pretty digestible 7-minute long song. Especially like Maiden songs, they do creep up there, just like Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, like one of the first songs that really kept me interested to a whole 14-minute song. So yeah, so Iron Maiden is my number 1 album for 1984.
Nice.
Got a pretty sneaking suspicion that's the trend that's going to continue. Matt?
I'm right there with you, Will. My album is also Iron Maiden's 5th album, Power Slave. So this is the guitar album for me when I want to play along with Iron Maiden. I'm not quite up to their league, but when I want to pull that red and yellow guitar down and riff out to some Iron Maiden, I go onto YouTube, put on the Power Slave playlist, and just let it roll and see what I can figure out. So a few little things about Power Slave. It's actually the first album that I ever bought with my own money. It was on cassette at the time. My parents told me that we were taking a family trip with my cousins from Ontario to Florida for the first time, and I needed something to listen to on the long plane ride. I was going to be sitting by myself for a while and on Delta Airlines, my little, cassette player and headphones, and so I bought Power Slave, and so I've been obsessed with the album ever since.
Nice.
Interestingly, of course, I had to dive deep into the making of the album. So as they do, they record with Martin Birch, but instead of pulling themselves up in, say, the UK, Iron Maiden flew to Nassau near the Bahamas to record this album. So a Caribbean island sort of thing. And I remember them. I've got all their documentaries where they talk about the making of Power Slave and Number the Beast and such. And so when they were making this album, they went to a studio called Compass Point, and I had to go on Google Maps and see if that was still there. The studio I don't think is still functioning, but you can see the building. They've turned it into kind of like a nightclub restaurant thing. But I was just kind of find it weird to see this random. Oh, this is where Power Slave was recorded. Just in this.
I think Back in Black was recorded there too.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is actually for me, he's done so much fabulous artwork, but Derek Riggs, this is peak Derek Riggs for me. And of course, he designs all of this artwork on huge canvases, and they shrink it down. When they were in Nassau, he was complaining so much humidity with all the oils and stuff, the paint that he sent that from to paint with. He'd go to spray something, a detail, and because of the humidity, the paint just wasn't sticking, and it would start to kind of roll down. I can imagine doing something detailed as this cover would be really frustrating when your ink isn't sticking. So yeah, that's my number one, Power Slave.
I think the first time I ever saw the Power Slave cover was on a mirror.
Oh, right on.
Because I had a cousin that was a huge Iron Maiden fan. He saw them on this tour with actually Twisted Sister opening for them. So, okay.
They put that in Halifax?
Moncton, actually, at the Coliseum. Those were the days, right? Chez, your number one for 1984.
Okay. So when I was making this list together, this one kind of jumped right at me. I just love this album. My favorite album by this band, and it's Triumph, Thunder 7.
Oh.
Every song is fantastic. Spellbound, Follow Your Heart. What great singles. What might be my favorite Triumph song, it's towards the end of the album, just before the instrumental, Stranger in a Strange Land. I just love that song. Might be my favorite Triumph song. Killing Time. Time Goes By, another great deep cut. But, Rick's singing, his guitar playing, Gil's drumming, Gil's singing, the whole band, Mike Levine, like 10 out of 10 for me, and prime Triumph here. And just, it had to be my number one. I remember walking to a stereo shop when this was released. It was like a 35-minute walk from my house. It was great back then because you had like these stereo shops that would have they would sell cassettes and vinyl. And so walked there and got that with my Walkman and listened to it on the way back. And I've had many versions of the album since then, and had to be my number one, Triumph Thunder 7.
Cool. That's my favorite Triumph album too. It's one of my favorite albums ever. It's probably one among the first few albums I ever bought. I bought the cassette. I love the cover, the Da Vinci, from the Da Vinci painting, and I think it's a great sounding album. It's the only one they did Eddie Kramer produced, so it's a good sounding album. And I couldn't agree with you more. That's very cool. Okay, so that leaves Bugs number one. The album's been mentioned, and I mentioned it too on mine. It's a great album. Metallica, Ride the Lightning. Really, I like Kill 'Em All, but this was a quantum leap forward. I mean, and the metal community as a whole took notice, right? They're like, oh, this is a step up, and they dared to do a ballad, right? How dare they, but I mean, Creeping Death might be one of my might be in my top 10 Metallica songs. I never get tired of that one. I love the instrumental Call of Cthulhu. You know, I can never get it straight when it's going to end because it's got so many false endings. But yeah, great album. And what a great year. And the fact that we've got a little bit of variety, but a lot of the same ones, I think says a lot. I mean, a lot of these ones I had mentioned made it into my 32. So I don't know. There was just something about this year. You had a lot of strong debut albums, and you also had bands that were just hitting a peak, or you had bands that were, you know, in some cases making a comeback of sorts. A lot of bands' most successful or most beloved albums came out this year. So yeah, there's definitely something special about 1984. So there you go, folks. As promised, I told everybody, don't worry, there would be a full panel episode on 1984. We couldn't let it go by because it's such a momentous year full of great music. What did we miss in your opinion? List them below in the comments. And don't forget, you know, follow, make sure and subscribe, hit a like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And we'll have all these guys on again in some configuration or another. I want to thank everybody for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Go play something from the year 1984 and rock out.